Britney Spears was once presented as something perfectly controlled, a complete image, clear, recognizable, predictable in the way it was supposed to be. Everything about it worked, until it didn't, because what followed wasn't a slow decline. It was a shift, sudden, visible, impossible to ignore, the same person, but a completely different narrative. And the reaction was immediate. Not confusion, not hesitation, judgment. A version of the story appeared almost instantly, explaining what had happened, defining who she was, and why everything changed. But that explanation came from the outside, not from her, which raises a different question. Not what happened to Britney Spears, but who decided what it meant. Before anything started to break, everything looked complete, not just successful, structured, a sound that fit the moment, an image that matched the sound, a presence that was easy to recognize, and easier to repeat. Nothing felt accidental, every detail aligned. And that's what made it powerful, because it wasn't just popularity, it was construction. A version of a pop star designed to work across every surface: music, television, interviews, public appearances, all consistent, all controlled. And when something is that consistent, it scales fast. The reaction becomes predictable, the attention becomes constant, the system reinforces itself. More visibility leads to more demand leads to more exposure, and the cycle continues. At that stage, there's no reason to question it, because everything is working. But that kind of structure creates something else: dependency, not on the audience, on the image itself. Because once an identity is that clearly defined, it becomes difficult to exist outside of it. Every movement is measured against it. Every change feels like a risk. And over time, that pressure builds, not from failure, but from maintaining something that can't easily change. Which means the problem doesn't start when things go wrong. It starts when nothing is allowed to go differently. At first, attention feels like confirmation, a sign that everything is working. More cameras, more coverage, more visibility across every platform that matters. And when the image is stable, that attention reinforces it. But attention doesn't stay neutral. It evolves, because once something becomes widely recognized, it stops being observed. It starts being examined, closely, constantly. Every appearance becomes material. Every reaction becomes a headline. Every moment becomes something to interpret. And interpretation doesn't stay balanced. It leans toward what gets the strongest reaction, which means the image is no longer being maintained. It's being tested, repeatedly, in public, without pause. And over time, that changes the dynamic. Because the same system that built the image starts to pull it apart, not intentionally, but structurally. Because attention doesn't protect anything, it exposes it, everything, including what was never meant to be seen that clearly. And once that happens, control starts to shift. Not suddenly, not all at once, but gradually, from the person to the people watching. Because when every moment is captured, and every reaction is interpreted, the narrative doesn't come from the source anymore. It comes from the outside. There isn't always a clear moment when control is lost. It doesn't arrive with a signal. It doesn't announce itself. But sometimes, there's a point where everything changes direction, not gradually, decisively. The same attention that once amplified the image now isolates it. Every moment becomes evidence. Every reaction becomes part of a larger conclusion. And once that conclusion forms, it moves faster than the person at the center of it. Because narratives don't wait. They expand. They connect moments that weren't meant to be connected. They define patterns that weren't chosen. And once that structure exists, it becomes difficult to interrupt. At that point, control doesn't disappear. It shifts away from the person toward the system surrounding them. Legal structures, media framing, public interpretation, each one reinforcing the same version of the story. And when those layers align, the original voice becomes less visible, not necessarily silent, but less present in the way it's understood, which changes the entire dynamic. Because now, what happens next is no longer determined by the person alone. It's filtered through systems designed to manage what can't be stabilized. And once that happens, the question is no longer about recovery. It's about authorship. Who decides what this story means from this point forward? For a long time, the narrative felt fixed, defined, repeated often in auto become accepted, not necessarily questioned. Because once a story is told consistently, it stops feeling like a version. It feels like the truth. And that's where it stayed. Until something small started to shift. Not from the system, from the outside of it. Fragments, comments, observations, patterns that didn't fully align. At first, they didn't change anything. They weren't strong enough, but they accumulated, slowly. And accumulation changes perception, because once enough inconsistencies appear, certainty weakens. The same narrative starts to feel incomplete. And that's when attention changes direction, not away from the story, toward it, examining it again, looking for what was missed. And that's where the shift becomes visible, not in events, in interpretation. The same moments that once confirmed one version begin to suggest another, not opposite, but different, and auto-disrupt what was assumed. And when enough people begin to see that difference, the structure changes, because narratives don't hold on their own, they depend on agreement. And once that agreement breaks, the narrative doesn't disappear, it reconfigures, which means control shifts again, not fully back, but no longer in one place, distributed between the system and the people questioning it. And that's where the story changes. Not because something new happened, but because what already happened was understood differently. At the beginning, everything looked controlled, a complete image, clear direction, defined identity. But that control didn't belong entirely to her. It was shared, built across systems designed to create consistency and maintain it. Over time, that balance shifted, tension increased, interpretation expanded, and the narrative moved further away from the source, not suddenly, but steadily, until control no longer meant management. It meant distance. Distance from the way the story was told, distance from the way it was understood. And once that distance exists, the narrative continues without you, unless something interrupts it, not by changing the past, but by changing how the past is read. That's where the final shift happens, not in events, in meaning, because meaning isn't fixed. It depends on who is interpreting it, and how much they agree. And once that agreement changes, control changes with it. What makes Britney Spears different is not what happened to her, it's how the story about her kept moving, from construction to collapse to reevaluation. And in that movement, one thing becomes clear. She didn't lose her career, she lost control of the story told about her.